So let's bring up my studio guests. I'm delighted to be bringing up now Nitin Jaiswal, Head of Asia Pacific for Bloomberg, as well as Karan, Mohla, the General Partner of B Capital. Let's give them a warm welcome. They can come over on stage here. While they come on up, I'd like to just tell you, in one sense, the climate challenge is really simple. We, humanity, have built a modern world based on energy from fossil fuels. And the emissions from those fuels are breaking the climate. We broke it, so we need to fix it. But how? The greatest innovation challenge, I would say, that humanity has ever faced is how can we get to net zero through investment and technology? And once again, how can India set the pace? So, Nitin, the UN just released its climate assessment. There isn't any debate on what we have to do. We absolutely know it. To quickly reduce and eventually totally get rid of greenhouse gases. So the challenge is, how do we do that? So where do investment and technology come in?
Yeah. See, first of all, after doing 9 panels, I get to be on the panel to speak, so it's always good.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you. So I think, as you rightly said, there is an urgency. The challenge which I see, the action of individuals and institutions to solve that crisis, that is lacking. Okay? We have the money, we have the capital. We have seen when Ukraine crisis happened, when the banking crisis, the capital actually came in. Okay? So now the way I actually look at the whole thing is, instead of looking at capital and technology, we need to step back and what I call the convergence of 5 I's. This is something we discussed on our table also today, is the way forward for us to solve that. So what are the convergence of 5 I's? Okay? So the first challenge which we see is the intention. Okay? So we have to have intention where everybody trusts each other, because that is lacking in the climate space today. Okay? So that is the first I. The second I is the innovation. That's where the technology comes in. Because if you look at what happened in financial markets, it was the technology disruption by the fintech players which forced large players to adopt technology. And what is happening in climate space from 1993 till now, not much has actually moved. And the only way you can make that happen is by forcing companies to actually get these new companies to adopt the technology, and that disruption will help. So we have the intention, we have the innovation, and the third I, what I call, is the information. Because today there is so much of information and misinformation that people are able to basically misuse it. So we need to step back and see how are we going to streamline the whole information so we are able to measure whatever the technology, whatever the investment is coming in is actually moving in the right direction and is creating the right impact. So you minimize the concept of greenwashing. The fourth I, what I see, are the institutions. How do we hold institutions accountable for their commitment? They started making commit from 1993, every time that commitment get pushed forward. So how do we hold them accountable is something we need to really look at, and that's where the intention also come in. And the last I is what I call the inclusion. So the way I actually look at it is, because today we are asking institutions to play a very important role in solving the climate crisis using technology. But we are not making individuals, you and me, accountable and a stakeholder in that. Unless and until we change our behavior, unless and until we demand from the institutions to change their behavior, it is not going to happen. And inclusion, apart from individual, as the minister said, the next I is about the life or the circular economy. Okay? So if you are able to have a convergence of these 5, the investment will come, rather than just focusing on technology. My closing submission on this is, we need to match the urgency of our action to the urgency which we have in the climate space.
Interesting. Very well put, Nitin. So I'd like to bring in Karan, Mohla, the General Partner at B Capital, investing in very promising startups. Tell us about some of the strong ideas that you've seen. Are there enough strong ideas to invest in and enough capital to fund those ideas at scale to reverse the harmful effects of climate change?
I think that's really the central question. So, by a lot of estimates that we've seen, India alone will require about $10 trillion over the next 20 to 30 years.
It's a lot of money.
So that's one. Globally, it'll be close to 100 trillion over the next 20 years. So it's a lot of money. Evidently, there's been a lot of capital that's been raised more so in the equity side of things. However, the kind of solutions that are needed to build out require a lot of infrastructure, project financing, debt financing, blended finance. I think all those solutions require a lot of patient capital as well. So I think there's a confluence of those factors. At least our belief at B Capital is capital will be available, but the kind of solutions to the point Nitin was also making need to be not just tech-oriented, they will be tech-led. But there is a huge component of infrastructure, of physical assets, and the kind of gestation periods required, which are not necessarily associated with technology and tech startups. It has to be a combination. The kind of startups or the kind of companies that we're looking at and that we see, and we may not invest in, but I think where we see a lot of encouragement globally is around the whole area of climate adaptation and mitigation as one, in the areas of food and agriculture and circular economy, in EV enablement, and around climate, around carbon capture, carbon science, etc. Now you could look at these in 10 different ways, but essentially that should capture most of it. I think the big challenge that we see right now is there's a lot of capital that's being available for tech-led solutions, but the kind of capital that's required for slightly longer term period projects is probably less than what's actually required. And that's a big area of focus where it cannot just be venture and private equity funds, but much larger pools of capital, which are possibly a combination of public and private, which is sort of needed. And I think the biggest challenge that we see is, should this be looked upon as from a financial rate of return or a double bottom line, so more of an impact point of view? And I think the answer lies in probably a bit of both. And changing that mindset is a big part of the challenge that we see today with different stakeholders in the ecosystem. And some of them touch in the 5 Eyes that Nitin mentioned so eloquently. I think that's a really good way to sort of capture it. But ultimately, I think it has to be led by adoption from the corporate side, from the traditional industries. Because unlike the digital side of, whether it be e-commerce, fintech, etc., the real distribution will come from traditional businesses in manufacturing, in financial services, in retail, because that's where the outreach to both end businesses and end consumers is the highest. So that collaboration needs to be really, we need to be joined at the hip for that. I think getting that right is probably the single hardest thing to do, because it requires an alignment of interests which may not be necessarily always aligned, always at the same time.
Right, interesting. How do climate innovations, Nitin, stack up against other investment opportunities that we're seeing out there in other fields like gaming, healthcare, e-commerce? Are we sucking money, capital from what we need to do to fund things that might just be good to do?
Yeah. So I'll take that question a bit differently. So I think this is something very important for us to look at. And we always take, the climate tech as something like fintech, because we are so enamored with fintech. We have to change our mindset, from the policymakers' perspective, the way they are going to formulate the policies, the way they're going to come out with the tax breaks and the support, from the investors' perspective, and also from the startups. The skill required to be a clean tech entrepreneur is much different than any of the other, because here you are creating a real infrastructure. You are investing a lot of money in R&D, which is not the case with most of the other sectors. So I think if we want to accelerate climate tech, I think we need to step back and educate everybody that it is different completely to a larger extent from the other other techs.
Interesting.
So
that's change of mindset.
Yeah, change of mindset is what we need if we really want to accelerate investment into climate tech.
Karan, you noted recently that 3 of the largest global asset managers, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, Ray Dalio's Bridgewater Associates, publicly noted that the underlying opportunity of India was there, and that they plan to invest more in the country. So say more about climate innovations and how macroeconomic factors could really make this next decade transformational for India.
And I think, the Minister Vaishnav actually covered that in his opening presentation as well. So it's a confluence of what global asset managers and allocators of capital are saying, A. B, it's what the government is doing in its part in setting the agenda for climate. And to your earlier question, I think climate touches upon every bit of every sector today. So climate is a horizontal, but also a vertical. And the kind of innovation that we see, which is, and it's two very disparate sets. One is looking at solving problems for India, which are very unique, very different from a lot of the global north problems, and quite different from a lot of the global south problems as well and challenges. So that India layer is one. The other is innovation from India, again for the world, like we've seen in SaaS. That will be more digital and tech-led. We've already invested in companies that are doing that today. So the availability of capital, the focus on India, the encouragement from and policy setting from the government, and just, I think, innovating in the right way for the right kinds of solutions in climate, where India is a great test bed, and then you're able to export that outside. I think that's what will lead to a lot of this next set of companies coming out of India in this sector.